All right, we are back in action. Big Ten, betting you, college football. It's all here right now. We're going to talk about the teams. Not 10 of them, not 12 of them, 18 of them. That's the world we live in. But I got the man for the job. Matt Gajewski joins me. I am Ben Rasa, and this is Betting You. We're going to run through the Big Ten. We're going to talk about some win totals, maybe some futures, just like we did with the SEC, just like we did with the win total show, all available on this channel. I want to start, Matt, with the same question I asked you when we talked SEC. I would assume that you're assuming that this conference could have a couple teams in the playoff.
I'm assuming they'll have 3 teams in the playoff. We talked about this in the SEC video. Anything less than 3 and, the committee and the NCAA at large is just going to get bullied by the SEC and the Big Ten. And they don't want the SEC and the Big Ten to break off and start their own thing. So they are incentivized to put 3 of these teams in. And these are the 2 most talented conferences in football. There shouldn't be any problem getting 3 of them in unless there's complete chaos. That's more likely in the SEC, a better top to bottom conference. This is a top heavy conference with a bunch of teams that make no noise year over year. That's changing. There's a lot of coaching changes, but for these programs, it's a lot of year 1, year 2 guys. They're going to need to build a little bit if they're ever going to chase down the likes of Ohio State, Oregon. So I think they get 3, but we kind of know who those 3 should be. Maybe we'll see some noise. I don't know. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, we will. There's no doubt about it, and that's what we're about to do. There's a bunch of teams here, and we're starting with the best teams, the teams that are going to be, I think, pretty clearly playoff relevant. And no, it's not Illinois. It would be Ohio State, who this is a team that made the win total show for me. I talked about this at length already. You got a 10.5 win total. They're obviously very, very live. I think they will be in the playoff. I think they have a real shot to win the whole thing. Feel free, I'm not going to spend a ton of time. It's pretty simple. They play Oregon, and I think that's going to be a massive challenge, but they can still drop that game and mop up Penn State and Michigan, and I don't see them losing 2 of those 3 games this year.
I don't see them losing 2 of the 3 either. That would be a big surprise. Talent-wise, they're just a lot better than what Michigan and Penn State are going to put on the field. A lot of people will talk narratives. Ohio State has not been able to get past Michigan. They play that game at home, and I'll take anyone's money if you want to give me something close to a pick 'em on that game, because Ohio State has a significantly better roster. Starts with Will Howard. He upgrades them at quarterback over what they had with McCord. They add Judkins to a backfield that already had Henderson. They're just adding more depth, so they should be very talented at running back. You do lose Marvin Harrison, but you recruit the best receivers in the country. Jeremiah Smith's getting a ton of hype, as did Carnell Tate last year. Combine those 2 elite recruits with the returning production of Emeka Egbuka. Offensive line returns 4 full-time starters. One of them's probably not even going to play. I don't know what they're going to do at center with Carson Hinsman and Seth McLaughlin, the Alabama transfer, coming in. Both of them are kind of concerns to me. McLaughlin, you guys probably know, has a real problem snapping the ball over the quarterback's head, which isn't going to fly. Tackle is a bit of a concern, but this offensive line is still full of elite recruits. They should be able to piece together a competent unit, which is exactly what they did last year. In the defense, 10 returning starters. There's no real warts among any of them. The lone starter they replaced, they backfill with Caleb Downs. So, this team, this is a top 4 talent roster in the entire country. And they're hard to bet because they are to be a top 4 talent roster in the country and finish that way. But yeah, you're looking for positions on this team, playoff stuff. They should be right there.
Yeah. I'm just buying. So you can dig into your own markets, how aggressive you want to be. Do you want to
so I might bet them against Akron week 1. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself.
The Zips. Hold on. Now,
also, here's the quick theory. I'll make it very short. They're favored by 50.5 points, but they have a ton of position battles. Will Howard is fighting off not just Devin Brown, but 2 elite recruits, Julian Say and Aaron Nolan. If Ohio State doesn't take Georgia's approach and start playing some of these guys, they're going to transfer. They have elite depth right now, and behind like Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, like Jaden Ballard, Mylan Graham, Brandon Enos, these are all elite recruits. They need to play. They need to play, especially against these terrible teams like Akron, which also means like you have guys that are trying to win positions. Like they're not just going to lay over when they get in games. you're getting 4 and 5 stars trying really hard against Akron. So, I mean, I don't care who Ohio State plays look ahead stuff. They don't have a look ahead. They play Western Michigan. But I mean, I think these backups are also going to try to slaughter teams to sort of make their way and win jobs.
Interesting. I mean, I'm just scrolling around. Put 63 on Western Kentucky last year. They put 77 on Toledo a couple of years ago. It really just comes down to that. There's two approaches. You've got the Alabama-Georgia approach, which is to be up 45-0 at halftime, and then you look at the final score and it's 48-3. And then you've got the Oklahoma approach, where you're up 42-7 at halftime and the game ends 80-10. Okay. I hate to pick on Akron. I bet them basically every week, but
I didn't take this yet. I might take it on that premise.
Okay. We'll zip action. The team that I am most worried about if I was an Ohio State fan would be the new team in this conference, and that is Oregon, because everything we talked about with Ohio State, I think is applicable to Oregon. First of all, you got a 10.5 win total, minus 110 on both sides. Talent everywhere. Gabriel and co are going to be ready to go. They get that game at home against Ohio State. You mentioned if they get 3 teams, say in the playoff, I think 2 of them are going to be Ohio State and Oregon.
I think those two absolutely, especially because, they play each other. The strength of schedule stuff is going to be really challenging. It's kind of a tough spot for Ohio State to go there. They have to play Iowa the week before, which is not ideal. Oregon, they play a bunch of cupcakes before that game. They're at UCLA, and then they play Michigan State. So you don't really have a serious threat. And then this roster, Oregon, I mean, we're not used to having them in this conversation. They're 3rd in the country in recruiting, 2nd in the transfer portal, and they are loading up elite classes. Last year's was good. 2025's is good. I won't get ahead of myself. Let's start with their transfers. Dylan Gabriel comes in, might be the best quarterback in the country. Awesome transfer. Behind him, they bring in Dante Moore, 5-star. He's there to learn and be the heir apparent. Running back, I have no problems. It's Jordan James. It's Noah Whittington. You don't really know those guys, but they're running behind an awesome offensive line that returns 4 players with starting experience due to injuries. Their lone transfer, Matthew Bedford, is an elite starter in the Big Ten, basically Indiana's best player over the last 4 years. And he has 4 years of starting experience. Your receivers are awesome. You lose Troy Franklin, but you go out and get Evan Stewart. Immediately broke out at Texas A&M in the SEC as a freshman. Tez Johnson's back after an elite season. You still have players like Trayshawn Holden, Gary Bryant, and then they bring in 4 recruits of at least 4-star caliber, and you have a 5-star receiver in Gatlin Blair. Like, they're just so deep everywhere on offense. This depth rivals Ohio State. Defense, I don't have a lot of concerns. This is probably the biggest concern if you were to pick out something on this team. But you're full of elite starters. You get 2 guys back on the edge. The interior rotated so much where I'm not super concerned, even though they did lose a couple guys up top. And you bring in Jamari Caldwell from Houston, Derek Harmon from Michigan State. Those guys should fill some voids. You still have Justin Jacobs, the Iowa transfer. He didn't even really get on the field much last year, 288 snaps. He was just fine. Elite recruits everywhere across the board back there. So if one of these young players jumps him, I'm not really that concerned. And then in the secondary, on top of returning 4 players with starting experience, you bring in Cam Alexander, you bring in Jabbar Muhammad from Washington, Brandon Johnson from Duke. All these guys have elite starting experience. Kobe Savage comes in from Kansas State. These are really good transfers, and you didn't even really lose a lot in the secondary. So Kyrie Jackson's really the only guy I'd be worried about losing. This defense is awesome. It's going to be the game against Ohio State is probably the game of the year in the regular season. And I'm not really that concerned with the rest of the schedule. It's definitely not easy. You got Boise, Oregon State, and non-con. You'd rather play cupcakes if you're Oregon. But, I mean, they should roll both those teams. And who else are you really concerned with? I mean, I don't have a lot of concerns.
No. I mean, late in November, mid-November, you have to go to Michigan and to Wisconsin. Those are not easy games, but Oregon can win those games. And I think Oregon's going to win those games. I think Oregon has a chance to go undefeated or lose one game, just like Ohio State. These are the 2 best teams in the conference to me. I honestly, I think you could be bullish on both. Pick one. If I had to pick one, I would pick Ohio State. But obviously, Oregon gets the game of the year in their building, and that is a big big benefit. The fascinating thing to me as we kind of move is it, every year Penn State seems to slide into this same role, even with the new teams, which is can they challenge the big teams? They go undefeated, then they play Ohio State or they play Michigan, and it doesn't work out. Drew Aller, we'll see. I mean, talk to me. 9.5 wins, definitely juiced to the over. Is the clock ticking on Penn State here? What's the deal? Are they ever going to break through?
They'll break through now. If you had 12-team playoffs over, I don't know, the last 10 years, whenever it started, they would be in like 8 of them, maybe 7, 8, I don't know. James Franklin, I think he's developed enough tenure with this program where he's not on the hot seat. He's getting closer. Maybe it's starting to heat up a little bit, but they're not firing this guy if he has another 10-win season. Plus, he'll go to the playoff with a 10-win season. They're going to bring 3 Big Ten teams. Their saving grace is their schedule. They face off against one Big Ten schedules. So they've got Ohio State, and I was trying to figure out who their second most difficult game is against. Got to be Wisconsin or maybe West Virginia. I don't know. And they're 10.5-point favorites against West Virginia. They're going to be pretty sizable favorites against Wisconsin, I would imagine, unless they put it all together. They do travel to Madison, so that is one wrinkle to this. But I mean, they're not going to drop 2 or 3 of these games. Yeah, you probably drop to Ohio State. That is at home, which is solid. But what are you going to drop 2 more to Wisconsin, USC? I just don't see it. Roster-wise, they do change offensive coordinators. I think that's probably the biggest coaching change we've talked about so far. Ohio State did add Chip Kelly. That's awesome. They were already good on offense. I don't really see much more of a ceiling for them. Whereas Penn State, a ton of ceiling they could possibly coax out of Kotelnicki, the former Kansas OC. He's 19 years of OC experience. Awesome basically everywhere he's been, and he's another one of these guys who's done a lot with a little, and now he gets a lot, at least on paper. I have real concerns with this receiver room. They lose Keandre Lambert-Smith, Dante Cephas, Malik McClain. That leaves Harrison Wallace as their returner. They have recruited the position well in the past with 4-stars, but they've just been hemorrhaging these guys because the offense is so bad. They'll transfer out to other programs, and that's what we saw with guys like Keandre Lambert-Smith. So, I mean, Julian Fleming's probably your wide receiver too. He was the Ohio State failure. I'll use that with a little bit of hesitation because their receiving room is so good. We've seen guys like Jameson Williams leave and have awesome careers. But, I mean, he's never been a star. Your best receiver is your tight end, Tyler Warren. Your O-line lost the 3 best players, and these are really, really hard guys to replace. We're talking 3 guys that are going to be in the NFL, Olu Fushanu, Caden Wallace, and Hunter Norzad at center. I mean, you bring in Nolan Rucci from Wisconsin. He has no experience. Other than that, you're just standing on depth, so that's a little bit of a concern. Defense, you lose a ton of premier talent. Adisa Isaac, Chop Robinson, a ton of your secondary's gone. Johnny Dixon, Daquan Hardy, Kalen King. They only added 5 total transfers, so they're fully standing on depth. And this has not gotten them over the hump in recent years, and I don't think they're going to this year. They've got an easy schedule. They're probably in the college football playoff, and that's just because the teams right behind them play way more challenging schedules. But when they get there, I'm not buying this team. Not to mention, they're going to use 2 quarterbacks. Pribula played better than Drew Aller last year, and Drew Aller didn't play poorly. He was 21st in efficiency. It's just their offense was neutered so poorly that they just couldn't actually pass teams when games were competitive. So I don't know. I tend to lean towards the over just based on schedule, but like the 2 teams up top, I'm probably not betting this team until they get to some of these more challenging games.
Yeah, I mean, you can get over 9.5 at massive juice, or you can get under 10.5 at massive juice. It's just the books are pretty confident in some ways it lands on 10, and I kind of see that. I think they're going to drop a game, and then they're going to lose to Ohio State, and they'll be 10-2, and they'll go to the playoffs and they'll lose. To me, that's the most logical explanation for Penn State. I don't think there's a ton there for me. I think they are what they are. I don't think they're a serious threat to Ohio State and Oregon, to be honest.
Neither do I. They're just too far behind them talent-wise with all their elite departures on defense, the O-line, and having no receivers. And I didn't mention Singleton and Katron Allen. I love those guys. You just can't build a true offense that's going to compete at the highest level behind them. I want to bet West Virginia so badly in week 1, but I don't think I can do it.
I'm gonna end up doing it. I'm obsessed with West Virginia. I love that team.
They got slaughtered by Penn State last year, and that
Yeah,
terrible offense. Drew
it's
Aller had
here
like
now.
350 yards against that secondary. It is better, but I mean, I'm hesitant based on that game, which
I'm gonna
scarred
be on
me.
that game. It's gonna be bad. Michigan. Again, we were talking about the SEC with Alabama. This is analogous to that. I'm not gonna say not a lot of love for Michigan, but they're certainly not talked about as a repeat champ in any serious vein. 8.5 wins juiced to the over kind of speaks that. Going further, do you even expect them in the playoff?
I think you see the Big Ten get 3 teams in, outside chance of 4, and it's going to. I think maybe the SEC or the Big Ten gets 4. The problem with the Big Ten getting 4 is your 4th best team on paper is Michigan. They play 3 of the top 4 teams in the country. They play Oregon, Ohio State, and Texas. They're going to lose all 3 of those games more than likely. So, I mean, where do you go from here? You got a 3-loss Michigan team. The teams behind Michigan are probably going to cannibalize each other, but I just don't see any path for them to win any of those 3 games, which basically means they're dead. There's so much change. New head coach, new OC, new DC, who I like more than the previous guys. Wink Martindale, at least, is like NFL experience. But Sharon Moore, I mean, he stood on an elite roster. They internally promoted at OC. I don't know. They don't have a clear quarterback. Orgy is this elite athlete, but we've never seen him, and we still don't know if he can throw. He can definitely run. Lost every starter on the offensive line. The only guy you brought in is Preeb, who was underwhelming with Northwestern. Their receiving room has the same problem as Penn State. They've been such a power run game over the years that their 4-star receivers just dip out. Carmelo English is gone. So now you don't have as many 4-stars. The guys you did have are on other teams. So you're standing on pretty bad depth. And the defense is going to be the strength. The problem I have is just when you get in these games where, I don't know, Ohio State gets the ball first, you're down 7-0. Now what do? You can't play from behind. So that's a problem for me. I think I'm just going to be looking to bet this team situationally and probably betting against them more often than not, to be honest, in these games.
Yeah, I'm with you. If I had to take it under 9 at -135, I think it's playable just because I feel pretty strongly like you. They've got 3 L's right on the schedule. And then, there's a lot of games that I think they should win, but they're not gimmies per se. 9-3, a lot of push equity as well there. I don't have a lot to say on Michigan. I really don't. You mentioned unproven at quarterback. So many questions. And this is a huge if for some reason you're really bullish on them, I think you can get a lot of actionable value, but I don't have that read. So I'm not looking to do that at all.
They should be a top 10 defense. I'll say that.
I mean, it's Michigan. They're going to be ready to roll, and they get some of these games at home. I just don't. The talent gap between those teams, and you mentioned these are not tough games. These are as bad as it gets in terms of playing Oregon and playing Texas and playing Ohio State. That's no joke. You get 2 at home, but still, I think they'll be underdog in all 3.
I agree with you. And there are some teams in the Big Ten that are getting better among these really bad teams. So it's also kind of like, yeah, Michigan's going to be favored against USC, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan State, Indiana, Northwestern. But the chances of them dropping one of those games, I think, is much higher than it has been in previous years. It only takes one game where you're 14-point underdog or you're 14-point favorite and you lose to mess up this win total. And last year they would have been 30-point favorites in some of those games.
Yeah, I mean, just you can do it out if you're interested out there. Take a money line of a 14-point favorite and add 5 of them into a bet, and you're going to quickly see that it becomes you might get plus money style, which means the books are saying that most likely you won't win all of them like that. It's not that easy to just win those. All right, we got plenty more teams here. I do want to mention right off the top, though, if you're joining us on this Odd Chopper channel, 1, welcome aboard. 2, if you like what you see, hit the like button, subscribe. Don't miss out on any of these episodes. And if you are looking for more, go to oddchopper.com and find what works for you. Whether you're looking for tools, we've got all that, or you're just looking for more content, picks, breakdowns, getting in our Discord. I've got my page up right here. Certainly our marketplace is about to explode. We're adding people every day, and we're going to continue to do that. Come and check it out. Really just see if there's anything that piques your interest, and you can try it out for a week. You get the Discord as well. A really cool time. Links are below, but just wanted to make sure I got that before we talk about USC. Another team that I kind of don't have a great feel on. They've had some talent, no doubt. I want to hear your thoughts on their quarterback. That's another thing I'm very interested in. And 7.5 wins. I assume that's more of a product than a schedule than a talent gap. But what do you see for USC this year?
I think they have 4 brutal games. LSU, they're nearly a touchdown underdog. Michigan, I guess, is closer maybe than some might think. But then you play Penn State and Notre Dame. Those are all games where you're looking at an underdog role, not a huge one. Like, you're probably not more than 10-point underdog in any of those contests, but you're still a pretty sizable underdog. Then you've got some tougher games against like Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nebraska, like the teams that you're sort of coin flip against in the conference. So right away, a win total is kind of tough for me to look at. I do think this team is interesting, but they have some places they need to improve for sure. Let's start with the offense. You have unproven quarterbacks. I love Maeva, but he comes from the Mountain West in UNLV. He was up and down there, had a ton of turnover-worthy plays, 24 of them. So he's a gambler on the field, and sometimes that pays off, sometimes it doesn't. Miller Moss is an elite recruit. We've only seen him play in the bowl game, and that was enough to run off Malachi Nelson. So, I mean, he looked great in the short time we saw him, but we're dealing with small samples. You never really know. Fortunately, I like his weapons quite a bit. You bring back Kyron Hudson, who played the most of these guys, but Deuce Robinson and Zachariah Branch got a ton of time last year. They were freshmen, elite recruits. Now they're stepping up. You bring in Jaquavius Marks at running back. This is a guy that has a ton of pass-catching prowess. The problem for me is this offensive line. I mean, 20th in pass blocking, 60th in run blocking. I see 3 clear starters more than likely, but I can't really find any more clear ones. Their best returner is Jonah Monheim at left tackle, but then Emmanuel Pregnon was average at guard. Mason Murphy was terrible last year. He's going to start. You haven't added a ton in the portal. I'm looking at probably like Gino Quinones is going to have to play again. He saw 208 snaps in 2022, but he was bad. You do have some 4 stars, Elijah Page and Micah Buenuelos from previous years. But, I mean, they're losing guys. They only recruited 1 4-star this year. It was Jason Zandamela. He left after the spring. So you have no depth. You're relying on young players, some of them highly recruited, some not. I mean, this O-line is going to be not terrible, but it's definitely not going to be among the best in this conference. And when you play teams like, I don't know, even in Notre Dame, that's going to be a big issue. On defense, you're basically just hoping the removal of Alex Grinch and the hiring of Deanton Lynn is going to fix everything. I kind of think it might to some degree. There's some weird stuff that happened with the defense last year. Mason Cobb transferred in. This is a guy that had multiple years of starting experience at Oklahoma State, and he was awesome there. I thought he was going to come in and, lead a defensive revolution. He was one of the worst players in college football last year. Like, what happened where Alex Grinch gets his hands on, what a guy that should be a team captain and turns him into a terrible player? And this defense honestly was better than some people think. Now, it wasn't good. They were 78th. There's this perception that they were like 131st or something. So, I mean, you're working from an average defense power ratings wise. You have a lot of talent. You added in a ton of transfers. Achille Arnold, Kamari Ramsey are great defensive backs. Easton Mascardenas Arnold comes in from Oregon State at linebacker. John Humphrey from UCLA. Gavin Meyer comes in on the defensive line from Wyoming. There is some talent, and they recruited really well on this side of the ball. 7 players that were at least 4 and 5 stars. They're just young. Really what it comes down to is, what does Deanton Lynn do with this unit? I see them as like a complete dice roll team. They could be either a lot better than we think or a lot worse. So for that reason, I think I'm going to gamble on them a couple times in the early season rather than take a win total. I'm very interested in playing them against LSU, who has a terrible defensive line. So I don't think they're really going to exploit this offensive line concern. I'd like to see over a touchdown. Right now it's -6, but I plan on just backing USC at times early in the year rather than hitting a win total.
I definitely don't want to bet a win total just because of the variance. Do you think they're a worthwhile maybe dice roll to make the playoff? You're getting 4-1.
You just got a lot of losable games, like getting LSU non-con, getting Notre Dame. Those are not great games to play in your non-con if you're looking at a future like that. You also have Michigan and Penn State. Those could really help. But, like for those reasons, I would rather maybe look at them to win the Big Ten, because then you can just erase those LSU and Notre Dame toss-up games, if that makes sense. And, like you're getting 22-1 to win the Big Ten, which is still pretty good.
Yeah. No, I'm buying on USC. I'm just not sure it's going to be on a win total. I think they're going to be better than people think. And you mentioned range of outcomes is enormous. They could be awful, but they also, I think, are live to win 10 games if they're better and they fix the defense. So
yeah, they need D'Anton Lynn to be the chosen one, fix all the guys that Alex Grinch ruined, and they need some young guys on the O-line to step up, because they do, and they need to not get hurt on that side of the ball. They can't have O-line injuries, and the young players that are high recruits need to play.
What is the path for Iowa, who always manages to win a bunch of games? Obviously, they've become a joke for quite a while now with the way that they play offense. We've talked about them a lot here. 8.5 wins, really juiced to the under. Is Iowa just going to Iowa, or are times changing in Iowa City?
They do not play the most difficult Big Ten schedule. It's pretty easy. You're at Ohio State. That should be a loss, but then you should probably be a slight favorite against Wisconsin and Nebraska, depending on how you look early in the year. Non-con, Illinois State, Iowa State, Troy, they should be a short favorite against Iowa State. So, schedule-wise, I think it's too close to bet a win total, but there is some hidden upside. I mean, you can't get worse coaching than what Brian Ferentz did with this offense. You bring in Tim Lester. I don't know. He was with the Packers last year, formerly the head coach of Western Michigan. There's just so many problems. The real issue I have evaluating the team is separating these players and their individual talent from Ferentz ruining them. We now have a pretty good sample of these guys going to other programs and being good. Kansas State, Keegan Johnson, the former Iowa receiver, played well there. Every tight end that comes out of this program is awesome in the NFL, and they are lackluster in college. So, I mean, there is a real stain on this offense from Ferentz. So can the change really help this out? I don't know. Cade McNamara was 148th among 178 qualifiers in efficiency. And it's not just him. Both Deacon Hill and Cade McNamara were top 10 in the country in the amount of on-target passes their receivers dropped. So, I mean, getting Caleb Brown, the 4-star, didn't help them. Sucked at receiver. They haven't added anything. Caleb Brown got a DUI in the offseason. I don't know what the punishment's going to be in Iowa. Maybe he gets the Ollie Gordon treatment and they feed him 10 targets. Who knows? Your best receiver is your tight end, Luke Lachey. He's awesome. Coming off a season-ending injury, we'll see. The O-line was really bad. Fortunately, they returned everybody, and they have been pretty good at developing talent on the O-line. So I kind of think this is just a ground-and-pound offense again behind LaShawn Williams in this offensive line that actually has 6 guys with starting experience back, plus 2 4-stars. And then, of course, their defense, the players they lose, you just have clear replacements to step right in. Cooper DeJean, Logan Lee, and Joe Evans are the guys that left. Everyone that returns with starting experience, we don't need to name them because they were all elite, every single one of them. John Nestor projects to start at corner. He's a sophomore. They run a ton of sub packages. So you have players like Kyler Fisher who have a decent amount of experience that were awesome already that are now going to play larger roles. And you have 4 4-stars on defense. I don't know. This bet comes down to how much you think Tim Lester can do with the offense, and I don't think it's a lot. I still think when Iowa's down in games, you're not going to be able to throw from behind. So I don't want to back them long-term, but I mean, against some of the other bad offenses in this conference, I'll probably look at them. I do think they are a bit better than Wisconsin and Nebraska, but I just can't bet on this offense till I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not betting on Iowa, but I'm not laying minus 200 for 4 months on 8.5. I'm just not doing that. So
agreed.
For me, maybe I'll bet them against Iowa State. I'm really down on Troy this year. I wish that game was actually week 1, because I think by week 3 there's going to be a little noise already about those teams. So for me, it'll be situational with Iowa. They're not a team that I think is a serious threat, unlike USC, who I do think is a wild card. Now, the ultimate wild card, the team over the last couple of years that there is no doubt, have been the most wrong on, it has to be Nebraska. Every year I think Nebraska is going to be good. And then they go to they're playing in Ireland. And then they're just immediately eliminated from contention of all things. They've got some interesting stuff going on, though. I want to hear about their quarterback and their future and their coaching staff. What is going on out there? Are they finally going to get back to what they expect?
Well, they play a really easy schedule. You'll notice there's some really hard schedules and some really easy ones. Penn State, Iowa, Nebraska are among the easier ones. Should be 3-0 in non-con. Your toughest test will be against Colorado. In conference, you're at Ohio State, at USC, Wisconsin, and Iowa. You should win most of your other games. So, I mean, you have a legitimate path for this team to, I don't know, start 6 or 7-0. I think they will get tested at times, like Indiana. At Indiana is a more difficult game than people probably think, but they'll be favored in their first 7 games, which puts you really damn close to the win total. Then you need to pick up one of your final 4 games, basically, or one of your final 5 games, and you're there. The problem is I don't know if they can actually pick off one of those games. I guess having that runway should benefit your 5-star freshman quarterback, Dylan Raiola. We don't know. He's just a freshman. I'm trying to pump the brakes a little bit because I made this mistake with Adrian Martinez in Nebraska and immediately anointed him the chosen one. So, yeah, he should be an upgrade, certainly on Jeff Sims, and Heinrich Harburg's still there, but I just can't bet on him being the chosen one right away. Receivers should be better, largely just due to health. They were so hurt last year. They bring in Jamal Banks from Wake Forest and Isaiah Nair. I like that. Former 4-star Malachi Coleman's there. The O-line's bad. There's no way around it. They already lost Teddy Prohaska. He was your left tackle starter. I mean, everyone they were Micah Mazkua is pretty decent from Florida. But really, if this offense is, you need.
You see? Nebraska is that crazy that every time we talk about them on this show, all hell breaks loose. I'm jumping in 7.5 at -120 for this team. I'm going to piece it together. I'm going to go over. Do I think, again, I'm talking large portfolio of win totals. UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa is your first 3. That should be 3, easily going to be 2.
When did you lose me?
No, you're back. I jumped in. You were talking about Nebraska's O-line, and then I started piecing together their non-con because I think they can get to 8. I really do.
My Wi-Fi. I don't know, man.
It's all dead.
I'm moving at the end of this month. Hopefully it's
nice.
Anyway, yeah, I guess my concerns on offense are you're putting Raiola behind this O-line, which that might stunt his development. But fortunately, the non-con you probably piece together gives them a runway to figure it out. So that's good. Defense is awesome. They were 39th last year. They returned 10 guys with starting experience. The real concerns I have, I guess, in the secondary, they already lost Roger Gradney, who is a projected depth piece. So they're not deep, but they are good up front. So I don't know. This is a pretty good Nebraska team. I think it's a little dicey with the O-line and lack of depth on defense. And, I mean, they're going to get kicked around by some of the better D-lines in the conference.
They're going to be all right. They're going to be all right. Another mystery team, the team, near and dear to your heart, is Wisconsin. They've done some things. They've brought in some guys, 6.5 wins, juiced to the over. Are they simply a spoiler for the good teams, or is this a team that can choose its own destiny and actually get in the mix?
If you can find a 6.5, this is the first one I don't hate. I promise I like some others later on. A couple things with Wisconsin. I think bringing Van Dyke should be an upgrade. They ran pretty bad at the quarterback position last year. They were another team that really struggled with drops. And I don't know what they were doing. They return everyone at the receiver, so it's not like I'm super excited. Will Pauling was solid as the one, but CJ Williams and Bryson Green left a ton to be desired. Joseph Griffin comes in from BC. He should help with depth. Running back should be hopefully healthier. Cross your fingers on Tawi Walker staying healthy. Him and Braylon were banged up on Ches staying healthy. Tawi's the guy they brought in. But Ches and Braylon were banged up last year. Presuming healthy should be better there. The O-line is very good. They were top 30 in run blocking and pass blocking. And they're getting players back. Like Jake Renfro missed basically all of last year with an injury. He's the former Cincinnati starter at center. This should be a top 3-ish O-line in the conference, so I have no problem with them running the ball. Van Dyke has quietly been very good when he's played. Last year, he was the 22nd most efficient quarterback in college football. He just got hurt. which is kind of this stain on his name. I know you bet him to win the Heisman.
Certainly did.
Defense, I'm a little concerned. You have nothing at linebacker back. A lot of these guys transferred. You bring in Tackett Curtis from USC, Jaheim Thomas from Arkansas. I mean, that's pretty bad. Your secondary wasn't great, so you're trotting out the same guys. That's a bit of a concern. They were 48th in coverage. They do have Hunter Wohler, who's a stud, but guys like Nazir Forkarine, I'm concerned with him. Delancey comes in at corner from Toledo. Your D-line is patched together with transfers. Wisconsin's recruiting really well, but they're still like a little bit away, I think, from really competing. Defense, I think they're going to be a bit of a concern and maybe more of a shootout team. Not to mention they brought in Alex Grinch, so the guy that ruined everyone at USC is now coaching your safeties. Please don't ruin Hunter Wohler. Please don't ruin him. Schedule-wise, Bama and non-cons, very difficult. They're going to lose that game. They've got at USC, Penn State, Iowa, Oregon, and Nebraska. I don't think they lose all the games. That's basically what has to happen for them to go under. Against, like Iowa, that game should be basically a toss-up. I would probably bet them straight up against Nebraska. Unfortunately, that game's on the road. Mm-hmm. But USC, Penn State, these aren't impossible games. So it's basically what we said about Michigan, but the other way. Like, all they have to do is win one of them as an underdog, which I don't think is that big of a stretch at 6.5. You should get to 6, and then you need to pick off one.
Yeah, you should. Again, you've got Western Michigan, South Dakota, and Purdue. That's 3. That's got to be 3 right there. So you need to find 4 more. And
Northwestern sucks.
Northwestern, there's 1. Rutgers.
They're better.
Minnesota at home. I mean, that's 6 right there. And then you've got some tough games. But yeah, I do think that they can get over. And you're paying a little juice, but not as much as I thought you would, to be honest. So I'm with you.
I didn't take it. There's others I like more, but this is the first one I have interest in.
What about Washington? Because they're next. They come over, of course. They've got some things going on. Awesome season last year. A ton of changes. They kind of broke through, and now what remains, 6.5 wins, juice to the under. It seems like they're taking a quite a large step back. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think so. I mean, Jed Fish comes in. I love him, but it took him a long time at not a long time. It took him a few years at Arizona. What do they have? 2 wins year 1, something like that. It wasn't good. Awful. You bring in Steve Belichick as your DC. I don't know if it's good or bad. Like, Bill Belichick's been running around Washington camp, coaching guys. This might be good. I don't know. Belichick's always been good on field. I think kind of just when they gave him the GM roles where things truly fell apart. But so much change. Will Rogers comes in. Will Rogers is a guy I've never truly loved at Mississippi State. He was 78th in efficiency in 2022, back when he had Mike Leach. So, I mean, that's still not good. He puts up a ton of numbers, but when you play in Mike Leach's system, it doesn't matter how efficient you are. You put up massive numbers because you throw 80% of the time. So I think there's kind of like, people look at the counting stats and think Will Rogers is elite and then forgot he threw the ball 750 times. And they throw the ball just right at the line of scrimmage. So he has an awesome completion percentage, but he has terrible yards per attempt. Anyway, he can't run either. So this offensive line is a real problem. They lost every starter, and they already have 2 guys hurt in camp. They're expected to be back for week 1. We'll see. I don't know. Transfers they brought in are very underwhelming. They're like guys coming up from bad schools, or like Enoch Vimahi from Ohio State, who was a former elite recruit, could never play there. It's a tough blend. They're going to get blasted on the offensive line, where Rodgers can't escape pressure, so that's a problem. They don't have any receivers. They lost 3 NFL draft picks and their number 4 to Alabama, plus all but one of their tight ends. Their best player is going to be a transfer in Jeremiah Hunter. That's a huge problem. The defense was already a bit of a concern last year. They were 40th, but they couldn't defend the run. They were 78th there. That's what absolutely gutted them against Michigan. I don't think they're much better there. Their top edge, Braylon Trice, is gone. On the interior, you lose a bunch of guys that played snaps. I'm not sure they were elite, but you basically turn to Sebastian Valdez, the Montana State transfer, to fix this. That's a huge ask to ask an FCS guy to do this. The secondary, I think, is okay. You bring in guys like Justin Harrington from Oklahoma, who's played at times. Ephesians Prysock from Arizona, Jordan Shaw from Arizona. Those are good players, but I mean, it's just asking a lot to stand on your DBs when up front you've got issues. I think an under is actually somewhat live here. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sold on this. 6.5 at -115. The schedule is actually pretty generous. That's probably, to me, their biggest asset. You've got Weber State, Eastern Michigan, Washington State Apple Cup style first three. You've got Northwestern, Rutgers, Indiana, UCLA. You're gonna have to win those games, though.
You have to win all 4 of Northwestern, Rutgers, Indiana, UCLA, and I make them on a neutral field the slight favorites against Indiana and Rutgers. And then even against UCLA, I mean, that game, if it were played today on a neutral field, should be around a field goal. So like what you were saying with Michigan, when you have like 3 pick'em games in the Northwestern, that is a large ask to win them all. And then you also have Iowa, USC, Penn State, Oregon. I don't know, man.
No, it's going to be like you said. It took them a while at Arizona. It's going to take them a while here. People are going to be ready. A lot of change. It's a short for me.
I agree.
Maryland, a team that honestly at times has been really interesting in the past couple of years. We've had some pretty strong takes on them, both good and bad, I feel like. What's going on with Maryland? Where are they at? Have they made progress? They've kind of been, idle in some ways around this 6.5 win total. Juice to the under this year. Does Maryland take a step forward or back?
I'm smashing this under. I already bet it. It's my favorite bet in the conference.
Ooh.
You can find decent odds. I still see 6.5 at like -125. Love that. I would
130. Yep.
Yeah, you can find pretty decent numbers on this. And for reference, their week 1 line, it's against UConn. It opened at 24.5. It's already been bet down to 20.5, and I missed it like a bozo.
I don't have it either. Great.
Yeah, they should be 3-0 in non-con, but then they need to knock off 4 of Michigan State, Indiana, Northwestern, Minnesota, or Rutgers. Seems like it might be possible, but I have this as the 3rd worst roster in this conference, and I'm not 100% sure they're better than Michigan State. They go from Talia Tagovailoa to MJ Morris. What a decline. MJ Morris 165th in efficiency last year. He was 111th in 2022 at NC State. Brutal. Running back is good. The problem is he's going to be running behind a horrific offensive line. This is the worst offensive line in the conference, I think. 2 starters back, 3 bad transfers. Like a guy from Shorter is projected to start. Where is Shorter? I have no idea.
Don't know. I know a lot of weird stuff. Shorter University is in Rome, Georgia.
Okay.
Well,
a guy, one of their starters is from there.
Shout out Shorter.
Their defense was okay last year. They were 55th. That was because they were 19th in coverage. They were 93rd against the run, 76th in pass rush. They didn't do anything to fix those units. They're trotting out the same bad players, and then they lost most of the secondary. So what does the defense look like? I think they're going to get run over by teams again. And then formally, they could stand on business a little bit in the secondary. I don't know what you have. You added 1 transfer on defense and Jalen Husky from Bowling Green. You don't recruit well. They were 84th in the transfer portal. I mean, this team stinks. I think they're going to get run. In my opinion, there's no way this team is making it to a bowl. Plus, Villanova is not a bad FCS team. That team is ranked 6th in the FCS. You want to get a scare? Play a good FCS team.
Yeah, I mean, it's not there are levels to all of those things. They'll be obviously favorite, and it'll be a moderate spread. It's not going to be a 40-point spread like you see in some of these
That's
games.
Villanova's Super Bowl.
Yeah, Villanova's, they've given some teams. They're on like the JMU trajectory. They're just many years behind it in the sense of like JMU used to play these teams as an FCS school, and they'd be like 9-point underdogs, and you'd be like, wow. And they play pretty well, obviously.
Yeah, they'll be sizable favorites, and they should win that game. I'm just saying, if you're picking an FCS team to play, you don't want to play the number 6 team in the country.
No. It's only downside. UCLA. Here's a team, honestly, I have so little to say. I haven't done much with them. 4.5 wins, and it is juiced to the over. I will say I do think they can eclipse that, but I'm not sure I'm super bullish on the team to begin with. Obviously, their stud freshman quarterback did not work out. What are they doing out there?
changing everything, and concerningly so. Deshaun Foster's the new head coach. He's kind of making waves at media days for weird comments. I don't really care. I think he's just focused on football. But Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator failure in the NFL, is now your OC. I don't like that. This team has already been bet down from -17 to -13.5 against Hawaii in week 1. I mean, they play Fresno. That game, Fresno State and UCLA is going to be a pick 'em if the Hawaii line is anything that suggests us anything. They're going to get murdered by LSU in non-con. So I don't know. Maybe they're 1-2 in non-con. That is not a good start. Like under 2 touchdown favorites against Hawaii. My goodness. Your winnables are Indiana, Minnesota, Rutgers, and Washington, I guess. You need to pick off maybe 3 of those. Okay, because you have a pick 'em as your last game in the year. I don't know. Unders are, I think, in play to get to the roster. Garbers was quietly pretty decent at quarterback, which was a surprise to me. He was 51st in efficiency, even though they wanted to do everything but play him. TJ Harden's back at running back. I think that's fine. Your receivers are okay. Your offensive line is okay. You have 3 starters back, some pretty decent transfers. Defense should be okay, and that's kind of just the story with UCLA is you're taking a step back in most places, but you backfilled enough where you shouldn't be horrific. It's just like most of these teams they're playing have a trump card over them in some area when your whole roster is just like average across the board. I'm not sure it's really conducive to playing in a conference like the Big Ten, and I think some things we're seeing suggest that. Like 4.5 points in line movement against Hawaii against them in week 1 is egregious.
I do think Hawaii is going to be pretty good for what it's worth.
So do I. I like Hawaii, but man, like
both
UCLA is 90th in recruiting this year.
Yeah, see, that doesn't make sense. I've never been to their campus, but it's gotta be nice.
It's in LA.
Yeah. Like, what are you doing? How can you not get people? Well, it's gonna be interesting because this is where it's very crowded. And I can't even, just so you know, it's not gonna be on the screen, but we're gonna talk about Rutgers right now. Their line isn't available to me in New York, but like, do you have UCLA ahead of Rutgers? Win total wise, Rutgers is sitting at like 6. What do you make of Rutgers?
Power rating wise, I have Rutgers a decent amount ahead of UCLA.
Okay.
Not a ton, but they're ahead. And it's because Rutgers kind of has some fatal flaws. They're largely on offense. You just can't trot out Ethan Kaliak-Manis at quarterback in this Big Ten. You could win 6 games with Ethan Kaliak-Manis, but you can't take the next step. You just can't. Flat out can't. So, I mean, right away, they're basically dead to do anything outside of make a bowl because of what they're doing at quarterback. Their line's pretty decent. I'll give them that. Their receivers are horrific. Your best receiver is probably like a Monmouth transfer and Demir Miller if you're getting the most out of them because the guys they have back are not it. Your best player on offense is your running back. Like, that's great. You have a good power run game. It's just the same problem with Iowa. When you get down against Ohio State, you can't come back. The game is over. You might as well finish it off at halftime. Defense for this team will be good. It's what they're going to stand on. They're better in the back end, which is a concern against some of the teams we haven't even talked about who have good run games. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if like an Iowa team would bully this unit. Like Minnesota's a power run game. They should bully a team like Rutgers. Wisconsin's offensive line should bully this team. So, I mean, projecting out the schedule, it lands on 6 so many times that I can't bet it. And this team just has too many fatal flaws to do anything.
Minnesota is a team that you just mentioned. You mentioned their what they've trotted out at QB over the years. 5.5 wins here. Obviously, they had, several years ago now, they had some really good teams and they kind of broke through and what Fleck did and all of that. Where are they at, though? It looks like they're fighting for a bowl.
I like this roster more than the win total suggests.
Okay.
The problem is it just comes down to they're taking an FCS transfer at quarterback. Luckily, their offense hides the quarterback so much that I'm not sure it matters a ton. You get a pure pocket passer and Max Brosmer from New Hampshire. I mean, this is like playing a freshman at quarterback. You just don't know. I have no idea what he's going to give them. Luckily, I love what's around him on offense. 5 offensive lineman starters are back. That unit was very good last year, 37th in run blocking, which is what matters, 71st in pass blocking. They should take a step with another year forward. 2 4-stars on the O-line, so you are deeper. You're not stone dead if one of them gets hurt. The receivers were actually pretty good. Daniel Jackson had an awesome season. Elijah Spencer was okay. Lameek Brockington's back. Your losses are depth pieces, Corey Crooms and the injured Chris Ottman-Bell. Plus, you bring in some pretty good transfers. Christian Driver's a former 4-star with Penn State. Tyler Williams was a top 100 freshman last year, recruiting-wise. So you have a top 100 player in Tyler Williams coming in from Georgia, who only had his freshman year, not to mention Jalen Varner from Emporia State. This is a quiet, amazing receiver core, like just from a talent perspective with the high recruits that they got in the transfer portal up to the proven commodities. It all comes down to, can Brosmer actually throw to them? I don't know. Running back is awesome. On top of Darius Taylor, Marcus Major, Say Bangura, and Jaron Mayhem, along with Jordan Newman, all have experience. Offense is very good if Brosmer puts it together. On defense, you return 10 guys with starting experience. Now, the defense wasn't great last year. They were 89th, but they did have a ton of injuries. Linebacker was a real concern after Cody Lindenberg got hurt. He's the anchor of the defense. He should be back now. You have a couple good edge rushers, 3 guys with starting experience there. And you add Jackson Howard from LSU, who was the 135th freshman last year recruiting-wise. Secondary, this is probably the biggest concern after Newman left. But you have 3 full-time starters back, a 4-star freshman in Coy Parrish, who's actually getting some pretty good time with this team. There's just a high ceiling for Minnesota that we don't typically see. If Brosmer plays like Tanner Morgan or something, like this team could actually contend with the teams like Wisconsin. So it's a bit of a leap of faith, but I like this team. They're taking money in week 1 against North Carolina. I like that. Should bully them in the trenches. I don't know. I'm pretty high on Minnesota, and I think I'm going to bet an over.
Slight favorite against North Carolina. That'll go a long way. You win that game, you're going to be very, very reasonably 3-0 going to a home game against Iowa. If you get that, you're going to clear 5.5, even with Michigan and UFC. Like, you've got UCLA on the schedule. You've got Maryland on the schedule, Illinois on the schedule, Rutgers. These are gettable games. I think 7-5 is in play for this team, not just in a ceiling output. So,
I wouldn't be surprised if they knock off a Wisconsin or USC.
That's what I mean.
As long as they can put it all together, which is that's why they're not like favored in those games, but they very well could be if this goes right.
We're getting to the bottom. We still have a handful of teams left. And again, if you did not get something and you have a question, Twitter, Matt_Gajewski at JazzRazBets. Discord will be in there. We're building that out. Again, go to OddsShopper, see what we've got from tools to marketplace. It's all there for you. Find what works for you. Links are below. What's going on with Illinois? This is another team that I rarely have strong takes on, but when I looked at them this year, nothing really stood out. Another 5.5 fighting for a bowl. I am less bullish on them than teams like Minnesota. Are you, or is this another team that you're interested in?
We're in lockstep here. I do not like Illinois. I think they get slaughtered by Kansas. That's a game I'm going to be looking to bet in week 2. And if they go 2-1 in non-con, you have to win 3 games of Purdue, Minnesota, Michigan State, Rutgers, and Northwestern. I think there's a lot of times where they're like right on this win total, which makes it very tough to bet. I'm interested in the under because I still see downside. Luke Altmaier was 101st in quarterback efficiency. He got hurt in the midpoint of the season last year, and he lost his job to John Paddock. Who's John Paddock? He was a Ball State quarterback, and he couldn't start at Ball State. He transfers to Illinois. I don't know if his plan was like going to GA or something after this. But, I mean, the second John Paddock gets on the field, he outperforms Luke Altmaier, never lets him have his job back. That is a huge concern for me at quarterback. What are we doing, Illinois? From there, the offensive line was not great last year. I don't think they're going to be a great this year. They only have 3 returning starters left. You're going to rely on transfers. You have J.C. Davis from New Mexico, Kevin Wigginton from Michigan State, who's pretty good, and Melvin Priestley from Grambling. It's just not great. You already lost your starting tight end, Cole Russ, to a season-ending injury. Your receiver core has Pat Bryant, who was okay, not great efficiency-wise. Zachary Franklin coming off, he had a season-ending injury in 2022 and never truly made it back last year. What is he going to give you? Your defense, I think as concerns, you were 63rd last year. You kind of stood on run defense, and that was because you had this absolute wagon on the interior, and Jerzon Newton, he's gone. What did you do to backfill it? You do add some pretty decent transfers, Dennis Briggs and Enos Sledge. They both come from Florida State and Auburn, but Anthony Johnson, Youngstown, General Hunt, Florida A&M, just like a lot of really low-level transfers that are going to have to play snaps for this defense. So I don't buy it. I think this is a bad Illinois team that's going to need a lot to go right if they're going to touch the over. They're not going to make a bowl, in my opinion.
I'm with you. Not a lot of things have to go right, and to me, the things that can go wrong vastly outweigh some of the things that could go right and steal a win. Northwestern is a team, they're going to determine a ton of the win totals in this conference. Almost every game that they face is against some of these schools that need this game. You've got a 4.5 win total, though. They're not going to be that easy of an out, and they're always scrappy. They always, as like 30-point dogs, give Ohio State or give Michigan a little trouble. Is that kind of where they're still at in terms of the conference, or do you see something different?
They're definitely like that. They're just a weird team. They probably shouldn't be in the Big Ten anymore with the NIL and transfer portal era. They're just admissions are too hard for them to legitimately compete. You have a new OC, Zach Lujan from South Dakota State. I think he runs like the perfect offense for Northwestern. 39% pass rate, super, super slow. So they're going to give their defense a lot of help because of the offense they play, which is what they need to do. Their defense is awesome. This is a really good defense for this conference. You have 12 players back with starting experience. You add in 2 transfers at linebacker. One of them is Nigel Glover, who was a former recruit to this team. He's a 4-star. Then he went over to Ohio State last year when there was the coaching scandal, but they were able to coax him back. So that's helpful. 4 starters in the secondary. They're going to stand on the secondary. The problem is on offense, they still haven't figured out quarterback. Mike Wright is interesting in this offense. So he comes from Mississippi State last year, basically known for his legs, can't throw, but you're running an offense that passed 39% of the time. If it's going to be like a glorified triple option type offense, I think he's a good quarterback for this. I like their receivers. Bryce Kurtz and AJ Henning were not bad. They were not good, but they weren't bad. So that's a lot more than can be said about some teams in this conference. And then their O-line, I think, is slightly above average. Nothing good, but I don't think it's going to lose them necessarily. So you brought this up. They're a team that is going to play spoiler. And unfortunately for the teams that might be spoiled, Northwestern kind of has this really volatile style with some skills that's going to cause problems. I'm not going to bet them, but I'm going to look to them situationally in the season when I think they can maybe take down some of those teams.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see it any different than that, to be honest. You mentioned it. I'm not betting their total. I may take some spots depending on how they look in season, but it's just not a team for me either direction.
When they play Maryland, we got to smash them.
Oh, yeah. See, that's what I'm talking about. Those are the time of shorts I can get down with. You mentioned Michigan State a couple times already, and not all in bad. Obviously, they're not expected to do a lot of good. But again, 4.5 wins juice to the over. What's going on up there in East Lansing?
Full rebuild. It could be scary bad because of a couple things. I like Jonathan Smith. I think he's going to do some good stuff in East Lansing with time, but this roster is just not cut out for this conference this year. Aiden Childs, the 4-star that he brought in to Oregon State, comes over. He flat out might be in the hospital behind this offensive line. 1 returning starter, 2 transfers. Luckily, they have 2 4-stars. Like maybe these 4-stars are pressed into action sooner than they should be because of how bad they are. The transfers, one of them's from Holy Cross. The other one's from Oregon State. This is probably a bottom 3 offensive line, which I don't love for an inexperienced quarterback in Aiden Childs, who's entering his sophomore season. The receivers are terrible. Monterey Foster is your number 1. Jerron Glover, you have 1 4-star. Nick Marsh, he needs to play if this team hits a ceiling. I don't know, man. Like, this is just a developmental year, and I hope Childs doesn't die. Defense is very bad. Some of your transfers are pretty good. Your entire secondary is back, but they were ranked 130th in coverage last year. So having these guys back, is that any good? I don't know. It's like it's not far off from like Colorado's defense in terms of how it's comprised. They have a ton of transfers, like 12 transfers on this defense. Some of them more experienced than others, but I just don't see Michigan State really contending. Unfortunately, that's kind of priced in their win total, so it's not really one I can see going with on here. I don't think there's much to be done.
I kind of feel the same way. I like the schedule. I will say it's pretty manageable. You have some, you're going to Oregon and Ohio State's on the schedule, but you can throw those games away. They've got some winnable games, and like Florida Atlantic isn't a huge deal. Obviously, Prairie View. Maybe it comes down to like BC though. That's kind of a weird game.
They'll be an underdog. They're only 11-point favorites over FAU. That's a bit concerning to me.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like you can't be messing around with those. That's going to be the killer. So really anything actionable here? Or are they kind of in that Northwestern bucket of just like spoiler?
I think they're worse. They're kind of a team I'm happy if I took an over that I see them on the schedule. They just, unlike Northwestern where they need Mike Wright to be like pretty decent, or Minnesota where they need an FCS quarterback to be good, this team, Michigan State, needs so many things to work their way to be even decent in this conference.
What about Indiana? Now we're getting down there. We only got 2 teams left. So Indiana, it's your turn to get a little airtime. 5.5 wins. Again, product of schedule, no doubt about it. How bad is this team?
They're dicey because they basically have the entire James Madison roster that they brought up here. And we'll see. This could go a couple of ways. I think the gap between James Madison and Big Ten is pretty wide, but they didn't just bring in those guys. Like Curtis Rourke comes in from Ohio. He was coming off the ACL last year, so he had taken a step back, but he was still pretty reasonable. If he can't play, like Taven Jackson has some snaps. They do have a 4-star freshman in Tyler Cherry. So the cupboard's not bare at quarterback. I question the high-end ceiling for year one, but I think they'll be competent, which is better than teams like Illinois, Rutgers, and Maryland can say. You have 5 transfer running backs. 3 of them are from James Madison, but Justice Ellison, Wake Forest, Elijah Green. That's a lot. You have Elijah Surratt, which I think is probably the name people love to see in the receiver room for James Madison. But honestly, I'm a little more interested in Keyshawn Williams from Wake Forest and Miles Price from Texas Tech, both productive at the Power 5. At the offensive line position, 2 returners. Those guys are fine. 2 transfers from James Madison, but Trey Wettig was a great starter at Wisconsin. So it's not just the James Madison players. You have other players that can step up on offense. And it's the same thing with defense. There's a ton of James Madison guys, Mikael Kamara, but Andrew DePepe from Michigan State, the 2023 4-stars there. Same thing on the D-line, James Madison guys, but CJ West from Kent State, the best player on Kent State. Same thing at linebacker and defensive back, like Najee Logan from UMass, Asbury from Old Dominion, Terry Jones from Old Dominion, DJ Warnell from Arizona. There's a nice blend here where I think this team is underrated, and I actually kind of like an over with Indiana.
Okay.
It's going to be a team, I think, that has a runway sort of to get it together. 3 of your first 4 games, FIU, Western Illinois, at UCLA is tough, but then Charlotte, they should probably win 3 of the 4. Then you go into Maryland and Northwestern, you could be 5-1 right out of the gate and cash this. And then you have enough experience where maybe you give teams like Nebraska, Washington more of a game, whereas you probably don't want to play those games early in the year. Fortunately, they don't have to. So I'm interested in an over, and I am interested in betting them. I already bet them week 1 against FIU. That's up from 18.5 to 20.5. They're so deep too. They're not as deep on the high end like Ohio State, but like 5 running backs, they all want to play. It's not, I didn't even mention D'Angelo Pons on this team. Holy smokes, that guy was good with James Madison. Anyway, I like this roster. That's it.
Yeah, you got Purdue at the end too. There are some games there, and it just shows the depth of this conference. Not in terms of like, oh, they're going to be a national contender, but they're not that many like Vanderbilt's style. Last team. Is it that bad for Purdue, man? I mean, what is going on there? When I looked at the odds and we are doing this in order, I was a little surprised to see Purdue actually last. Now, it's still 4.5 wins. Like, when you're in the Big Ten, you find non-con people to beat up on, but is Purdue really the worst team in the conference?
They're probably the worst team, but I will say they have upside.
Okay.
First of all, their biggest on defense, and their head coach is a defensive guy. He's the former Illinois DC, Ryan Walters. Purdue is taking a sort of unconventional approach that not a lot of teams in the Big Ten are. They're taking like a ton of really high profile transfers from Georgia, the elite schools, and bringing them down. So there's a chance we are vastly underrating them. I'm not sure. Secondary, you've got Nyland Green from Georgia, Kendrick Breedlove from Georgia, along with 2 other full-time starters. So, I mean, if those Georgia players are true to their name, that's going to be huge for them. CJ Madden at linebacker, he's from Georgia. On the offense, 2 of your receivers are from Georgia, CJ Smith and Denylon Morissette. So honestly, like a lot of their ceiling comes down to, do these elite players live up to their recruiting pedigree? Because one, it's really hard to play at Georgia. So, I mean, not playing there is not necessarily a bad thing, but also they could suck. We don't know. We haven't seen them. So there's a lot of volatility with this team, especially on defense. I like their offense. Assuming everything plays out the way we're projecting, it's going to be a shootout team, which is not really a good thing for the Big Ten. Hudson Card, 75th in quarterback efficiency. He runs a little bit. So he's not good. He's not bad. Doesn't give you an extra edge. They had Reggie Love to Devin Maccabee. I mean, Maccabee's gotten bigger this offseason. He already was like the least efficient, explosive running backs. I don't know if getting bigger helps you. Your receivers suck if CJ Smith and Morissette from Georgia don't pan out. Tight end's your best pass catcher. 4 of the offensive linemen are back. That unit was 82nd in pass blocking, 94th in run blocking. They do have 4 transfers, so they should be pretty good running the ball, I think. Not great, not bad. It really is, what do these transfers do? And I don't know. It's going to be like, assuming all 6 of them hit, which is how they hit their ceiling, would be a surprise. So I do think this is the worst team. They play Notre Dame and Oregon State in non-con. They have to go to Corvallis. That's not good. So I don't know. I don't see a lot of paths for them, but they could be better if these transfers hit.
Yeah, I mean, I have no interest in them. If I did, it would be to short them, but I'm not even really looking to do that, to be completely honest. All right, we have talked about every single team. I do like to do this right on the way out. And again, I'm going to mention it for the final time. Matt_Gajewski, all that info. Give him a follow on Twitter, JazzRaz Bets for me. And of course, find us inside the ropes at OddsShopper. If you had to bet a single win total or a couple of bets, what would they be from this conference?
My favorite bet is Maryland under 6.5 wins. You should be able to find that with slight juice, nothing crazy.
Yep.
Just don't see how that team gets to a bowl. And I think my second favorite one's going to be Indiana over the same number, or actually not the same number, over 5.5. That one should be reasonable as well. Nothing crazy in the juice.
I'm going to throw in a short of Illinois. I don't like this team. I just think there's a lot of question marks. There's not a lot of paths. Someone is going to be, again, it's all musical chairs, and a couple teams overachieve. I think it comes to the detriment of a team like Illinois. And of the big schools, I think Ohio State is the most likely team to go through unscathed or just drop one game. So if you're looking to lock up your money, I think there's better ways to do it than a win total, to be honest. But if you're betting a lot of win totals and you have a big bankroll and you don't mind having a bunch of money locked up, I think these are some pretty cool spots. So we've talked about the SEC. We've talked about the Big Ten. Plenty more conferences to go. And then guess what? Week 0 show will be dropping soon enough. Good work, sir. Let's do it again next week. What do you say?
Yes, sir. What are we doing next? Big 12 or something?
Yeah, we'll go Big 12. Why not? We're just getting one step closer to talking about KUSA and these made up conferences, which is where the real dollars are made. But for me, for Matt, and for everyone here at OddsShopper, thanks for tuning in. Support these shows, spread the word. Let's make Betting You the biggest college football podcast out there. So enjoy the Big Ten. Talk to you soon.